Everybody in RT was like so busy today because Putin's been going around getting deals, getting things done. And then, of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, excuse me, has been doing a lot of the same thing, but he recently had an interview earlier, I believe it was today, Russia time, with the head of RT, Margarita. And it was an hour-long interview, and I was reading through the entire thing as much as I could. And also I was reading through the just a few. I was watching through the interview that was translated because it takes a few minutes to get it translated. So one of the points that came out of this, right? Some of the main points that came out of this were the fact that in this interview, Lavrov said that the geographical objective of the special operation has changed. Remember that initially they said they were only going to be going into the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republics, freeing them and denazifying Ukraine. So he's saying that's going to change and they're going to expand into a number of territories, among them being Kherson, which is a very popular area where I think that they're going further, they're going next, and they've been expanding out westward, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a big deal because, well, the West is going to go and say, see, we told you Putin wants to expand like Hitler and conquer everything, and he must be stopped. That's just what they're going to say. But it's not necessarily the case. He gave several reasons why. Among the reasons was the fact that the West, particularly the United States and the EU, keep supplying Kiev with weapons. And they said that if the West continues to supply Kiev with long-range weapons, these objectives are going to move even further. So they're saying, we're not going to allow you to continue doing this and continue shelling the Donetsk and Lugansk region, which has largely been under Russian control. And we're going to actually shift our strategy to stop it. And we're not just going to stop with Donetsk and Lugansk because you guys aren't going to stop. So we don't trust anything that you say anymore. We don't trust the word of NATO. We don't trust the word of the West. We don't trust the word of the EU. They violated the Minsk Accords. So this is what we're not going to back down on this. We cannot lose this war, essentially. But the third point he made was that a nuclear war is not on the table. It cannot happen. Russia has repeatedly denied that they want a nuclear war, but there is a protocol to follow. They have like a protocol that says in case of a nuclear war, this is what you do. But obviously, they don't want that, and they see a nuclear war as the end of everything. They say it's, that's it. We can't allow that to get there. Now,
by the way, really quickly, Sam, did you see that in New York they released a PSA on how to deal with a nuclear blast?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just continue to go on. I just had to point that on because, the rhetoric of the Russians is totally different. It's nuclear war, that's it. World's over, right? I mean, that's just basic common
sense. There's fear because they control through fear. Yeah. Just like they did with the pandemic, with the Russiagate, with everything. Everything is through fear. Oh, Trump, fear. Oh, this fear. Like, it's all about fear. Whereas Russia's like, okay, here's what's going on. We're going to give you updates as to every single detail of the weapons we're using, the tactics that are going on right now. This is what's going on. These are how many dead, how many people alive, how many weapons, how many captures, where we're going. They're very transparent about what they're doing in that aspect. I'm not saying that they don't keep things to themselves, because every government does. And that is obviously, the essence of the state always essentially having some sort of corruption. But what I am saying is the United States is the opposite. They hide a lot of things. They do covert operations. They don't inform the public. They just put fear into the public, which is why they released that video, because they want people to fear Russia enough to say, oh, we need to get them before they get us, because that's always been their strategy.
Yeah.
And it's worked for a long time. It's worked with the neocons. It's worked with people who are just scared of whoever the unknown, right, is at that point.
Yeah.
So here is a map so you guys can get a better idea. So you see Crimea right there. This is Ukraine. Now, Crimea is obviously with Russia. That happened a while ago. And then you can see the Nova Russia. This is new Russia. This is what's been happening thus far. You got Odessa, you got Kherson, you got the Kharkiv, Lugansk, and Donetsk, and the Dnipropetrovsk, something like that. And then you have the green part, which is Ukraine, and it looks like this is what it's going to look like, right? It's not like this yet, but this is what it looks. Where I think
Lavrov was proposing, pretty much right here, that this is the expanded territory.
Well, he wasn't saying flat out. He was saying we're going to go after the three of these. He mentioned these three in the center. He mentioned the three in the center. These three regions right here in the center, and he said those. But Odessa obviously is one. So it looks like it. Obviously, there's Donetsk and Lugansk has already happened. So fully, is it going to be beyond that? Perhaps. I mean, I think Gonzalo was saying
he's in Kharkiv.
It's going to be even further.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's in Kharkiv.
It could be even. Yes, and he was saying it could be even further. There might be only a little bit of Ukraine left, but this is what I think it's going to look like. And I agree with the analysis that it's going to be like half of that is Russia and the other half is mini Ukraine. That's, I think, where Russia is headed. And like I said, the reason they're headed that way isn't because they want to expand and grab every Hungary and Poland and just take over the entirety of Europe, but more so because they want to make sure they have buffer zones. They want to make sure that that NATO can't just go and do this again and try to get on Russia's border like they're trying to do via Sweden and Finland. So that's why they're taking precautions, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, still a quagmire though, fam, right? You know, I mean, this is something that we've talked about. Like, are they going to allow this particular government, when it comes to Zelensky and this regime, or another one like that that's so friendly with the West, to exist right there on the border, even with the new expanded territory? And we have different opinions from different people, where Gonzalo Lira says once the East is solidified, look for a march from the Russian Federation to take the whole rest of Ukraine. They're simply, and then
right,
because they're simply not going to allow to have this type of government again on their border. But people like Scott Horton, from antiwar.com, he says, no, if they do that, forget about that. Now they're even moving closer to Poland and closer to NATO's border. And that's something they don't want to do, even to the point where he said that Putin and the Russian Federation making this move is still not a wise move. We all say it was expected, fam, from what we saw, knowing what happened in 2014, but it definitely seems like a quagmire moving forward, what to do and what can be done. Because, too, as well, from the funding from the West, giving this government those type of weapons, and now up in the ante, it's just worse.
Right.
Yeah,
they see the West escalating by continuing to do that. And you're right. I tend to agree with Scott on that one. I don't think Russia is going to expand beyond what they feel like they need to expand, because they're looking at it as a buffer zone rather than an attempt to get all of Ukraine. They don't want all of Ukraine. In fact, they didn't even want these parts of Ukraine. These territories have largely demanded and asked for the intervention of Russia, because they have, I think it's a huge percentage of the people in these regions, and particularly the east and the south of Ukraine, are Russian ethnic speaking people. They speak Russian. They are culturally Russian. They align with Russia. They want to be a part of Russia. Nobody is forcing them to do that. There are countless videos that you can watch from our underground journalists that are doing such great work, you can see them being welcomed, the Russian military being welcomed with open arms, saying thank you for coming, blah, blah, blah. So that I don't think is is going to be an issue. Obviously, the West is going to say, look how they're expanding, blah, 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 no matter what they do. So it doesn't matter. But I do think if they expand beyond that, then that is going to be looked upon as, okay, now you're really trying to take over all of Ukraine. You may have your reasons, but isn't this a little much? I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to stick to the areas that are primarily full of pro-Russian people. But of course, that may change depending on how much the West and Ukraine, push. Now, a couple of things to get through here. This is some of the things Lavrov said to Margarita regarding the conflict. He said at the beginning of the operation, Ukraine asked to start negotiations, and they approached it honestly. But in Belarus, Ukraine showed that it was not interested in talks. We asked them for a paper with the points we were interested in and provided them with the text of the agreement on April 15th. But nothing has been heard from them since. It's only been heard from Stoltz and other European diplomats that Ukraine must win at the front line because it now has a weak position there. So they must first win at the front, and then it will be possible to talk. Europe deters Ukraine from any constructive steps. There are foreign instructors there. The country is being pumped up with weapons. The Anglo-Saxons really want to make this war a real war. This is the escalation he's talking about here. The British benefit from this. They are sitting across the straits. It is beneficial for Americans because Europe is suffering. Ukrainians will not be allowed to conduct real negotiations until the Americans want it. And that is the bottom line where I do agree with Lavrov here, is that the Americans, the American people, Americans in this sense being the US Americans, yes, these sanctions are hurting Americans. Yes, these sanctions are hurting the British, but they're hurting the European Union way more. They're hurting Germany was so hugely dependent on Russian gas, and everything that's happening is sinking Europe's economy to the point where now the dollar is equal to the euro. So it's a great time for you guys who want to travel to Europe. I got a couple of friends there right now, and they're living the life right now. Because I remember when I went to Europe a few years ago, it was like let's say you got out, you wanted to get out 200 euro. It was like a little bit more than half of that you would get. You know what I mean? So it would cost so much more dollars. So euros were worth a lot more dollars in that sense. So now the economy of Europe is sinking. And so that is a huge thing he's talking about. And the Americans, of course, are driving this situation by continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons. So he's talking about that escalation. And as long as that continues, Russia is going to push back.
Yeah. And I think, fam, that even though, and once again, we talk about sanctions, right? Who they're intended to hurt. They never hit the target, right? This is a situation where, a lot of the sanctions, even though they're really hurting the European Union more than anything, Germany just, cut their nose despite their face. It's ridiculous. A lot of energy now gets moved around, and poor countries, Sri Lanka, yes, Pakistan, they suffer as a result of this shuffle that's going on right now. And that's something that's a shame, because we witness this when we go to the global south, how the sanctions hurt the poor more than anything.
Exactly. And the next slide, they talk about Africa. So Africa is one of the continents that has these countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, that are being absolutely just burdened by the shortage of grain and the high cost of petrol. And as Pasta mentioned, these developing nations are resource rich, but they have long been just colonized by the West and exploited. They are rich nations, rich countries that have been continuously just exploited and destabilized, and just continuously just been the areas where the West comes in and says, hey, you're gonna talk to us only. You're not allowed to talk to Russia or China. They continuously tell Africa that. But what's happened is that Africa and Russia have developed a relationship. Now, this relationship had long goes back to the era of the USSR, where they were working together to work on infrastructure and to get Africa out of the colonialism plagued by Britain by the Dutch, by the French, and of course by the US. And this is what he says. He said, we have had a good relations with Africa since the Soviet times. For many years now, we have been restoring our presence. Africans are reciprocating. So we never taught them anything, never forced them to do anything. We always helped them to resolve their tasks and to lead their countries in the way they wanted. And we always had mutual visits. So even though Russia is not at this moment, doesn't have the most economic ties to Africa, that is on their agenda, is to develop that further. We know China's doing it, to criticism and to praise. China's doing it. The United States has been doing it. Europe's been doing it. Now Russia is cultivating these relationships, and they have been working a lot together in terms of, there's a lot of Pan-Africanism rising that's very anti-Western, anti-imperialist, anti-interventionist. And in that Pan-Africanism, there's been a push to develop more equitable relationships where, that's what Russia's interested in, and having a more, you get to lead your country and we get to lead ours.
Yeah. National sovereignty.
So there's that. Yes, which is an important word
and I just
in this whole context.
And I just want to point out that the reason why they keep these countries destabilized is by design. So therefore they can extract the resources for pennies on the dollar. And the Congo is one of those great examples when the majority of the lithium, a big chunk of the lithium, I should say, comes out of the Congo, but yet it's extracted for pennies on the dollar. Because it's destabilized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just going back to the Europe, the EU in particular's impact, statistics say that 40% of the negative impact of sanctions is falling on the European Union. Americans are suffering less than 1% of it. So that's what it is. And he was just pointed that out, and that Ukrainians, of course, are also struggling, because this is destroying Ukraine intensely. Like, the country's never going to be the same again. And so here on this next one, this is the last part that I have of his speech. He talks about the talks, right? He says we used to engage in dialogue, and now we're not engaging in dialogue. And this is particularly where he was talking about not just with Ukraine, but with the West that's behind Ukraine, NATO, and their betrayal of breaking off the Minsk Accords and just going back onto their agreements, and the whole backing of NATO into this whole conflict. He said they're playing a very dangerous game, and they have not realized it themselves. However, there are many policymakers in Europe who are beginning to realize just that. We're going to talk about this in a minute. The second part of the section quickly is the fact that Zelensky and Ukraine are plagued by a lot of corruption and a lot of problems right now. And the sanctions aren't hurting Russia. Russia has other markets in the East. Russia has said as much. He said as much in this interview. They got China, they got India, they got Pakistan. They're expanding. They just made a deal with Iran. Iran is making deals with Turkey. I mean, this whole situation is happening right now. It's developing and it's shifting. And I think a lot of these people in the EU are seeing winter is coming, and they're like, oh shit, maybe this wasn't such a good idea.
Okay.
So that's what's happening.
Okay. Let's get on to the tweet.
So slide 31, Russia's Gazprom confirmed, like I said, an agreement for $40 billion, the largest in Iran's oil history. And then President Raisi from Iran and Turkey's Erdogan announced an energy cooperation deal for $30 billion. So again, like I just said, these sanctions are failing, that these sanctions that they're trying to provide against Russia. And on top of that, Ukraine's been plagued by internal problems, particularly corruption. And this is kind of funny. And I did a thing on it, and I have another one coming too. Ukraine's messy internal politics rears its head as Zelensky sacks top officials. And so he's launching investigations into this sort of corruption, and he's calling them traitors. So President Vladimir Zelensky, this is from Politico, removed 2 top law enforcement officials Sunday. This may indicate the fraying of an unofficial agreement among political factions to pause politicking and present a unified front against invading Russian forces. This doesn't look good for the West. They're worried. They don't like it. They say this is the opposite of Ukraine attacking corruption, which is what they said they would do. A Western official close to Zelensky's administration expressed concern to Politico that the move appeared to go in the opposite direction of the EU's request for Kiev to crack down on corruption and increase the independence of its law enforcement agencies if it wants to become a member of the bloc. In fact, it was Ukraine's corruption for so long that, and the media talked about this pre-conflict, that stopped it from becoming a NATO member earlier because they were so corrupt in the corruption or whatever index. And they go on, indeed, many political experts and anti-corruption activists viewed the removal of Ivan Bakanov, head of Ukraine's State Intelligence Service, CSBU, and Irina Venediktova, the country's prosecutor general, by presidential decree as Zelensky taking advantage of extraordinary wartime authority to consolidate his own power. So for the longest time, the West has been saying Russia's Vladimir Putin is a brutal dictator. He's all powerful. They talk about Syria's Bashar al-Assad, any enemy, right? They consider an authoritarian, brutal dictator. Well, look at Zelensky. It doesn't look good for the West. It makes them look blatantly like hypocrites. Zelensky appears to be acting like an authoritarian. And this is what they said. This is Tatiana Shevchuk, a lawyer and activist in the Kiev-based Anti-Corruption Action Center, said, it's not a move to do the right thing. It's a move to gain more control over our top law enforcement bodies. So this is what the excuse that they're saying. And Zelensky said that the Ukrainian authorities registered 651 treason proceedings against officials in the country's top law enforcement agencies for allegedly collaborating with Russia or working against the state's goal. He wasn't clear whether Bakanov and Venediktova were among those being investigated, but said that there was a probe underway. So that is essentially it. And since our guest is here, we can just skip the last part, but it's essentially just a video that I put up yesterday, just explaining essentially that Zelensky is unhappy that there are these traitors, and that Canada has gone back. A lot of just European countries and a lot of the West is easing restrictions on Russia because of the fact that winter is coming and the EU is clearly suffering, and it was of the return of the turbine to Germany, and they don't like that. And of course, there's this whole situation happening with Zelensky that is making it look like, okay, there's a lack of stability in Ukraine, and it's making the West look bad. Okay.
It's also, I think a lot of people are also kind of questioning whether, Zelensky, who is rumored to have a certain drug problem, if he's starting to freak out right now and lose complete control. A lot of videos surfacing out there of him, and he does not look like he's put together, fam. He looks like he's losing it, if you ask me. But I mean, this is who this guy always was. We always knew who Zelensky was a joke for quite some time, and he was a Kolomoisky guy put there by a Ukrainian oligarch who, funded the Azov battalion from the get-go. And this is stuff we knew. This is old stuff.